Welcome back to The Deep Dive. We're here to take your source material, which, let's be honest, can often be pretty dense, maybe overwhelming, and really pull out the insights you actually need to be well-informed. Today, we're tackling a topic that really sits at this interesting intersection. It's intensely practical on one hand, but also deeply spiritual on the other. We're talking personal financial management.
Yeah.
And we're diving into what our sources call decoding financial foundations. It's about exploring a system that demands both some real practical discipline, that's the truth side, and also this essential non-negotiable spiritual view, the spirit side.
Right. It's both. You can't separate them.
Yeah, it seems the goal is establishing a structure where money becomes a tool, serving your higher purpose instead of being the master calling the shots.
And look, if you're tuning in thinking this is just, another chat about balancing your checkbook.
Yeah.
Well, prepare for maybe a bit of an aha moment.
Okay.
Because the sheer scale, the amount of attention this topic gets in the foundational texts is genuinely astonishing.
Okay, let's anchor this then. Give us the gravity. What do the numbers actually say?
Well, the numbers really hammer home that this isn't some minor side issue.
Yeah.
It's absolutely central. Our sources point out that the New Testament alone has, get this, 2,084 verses dealing directly with stewardship, accountability for money, finance.
2,084, wow. That feels like a lot compared to other really core ideas.
It is a lot. I mean, compare that to verses specifically on faith, only about 215. For salvation, around 218.
So nearly 10 times the focus.
Yeah, roughly.
Yeah.
And what's maybe even more compelling is Jesus' own teaching. 16 of his 38 recorded parables. They deal directly with money or property.
16 out of 38. So almost half his stories were about how we handle our stuff, basically.
Exactly. If Jesus spent that much time using stories to illustrate how we handle resources, well, we probably shouldn't just dismiss it as, boring admin details.
No, framing it like that definitely lifts it up. It's not just about economics, it's about wisdom, isn't it? The stakes aren't just about being solvent financially. They're relational, spiritual, too.
That's it, precisely. And the practical fallout from getting this wrong, it's huge. The material we looked at, stats showing money and finances, are consistently the #1 cause of conflict in families.
Number one.
Number one. And financial stress is cited in a staggering 50% of divorces in America.
Half of all divorces linked to money fights. Wow, that puts, getting this right, it's almost like crisis intervention level importance, relational preservation.
It absolutely does.
Right.
And the sources, they give a really strong warning against what they call the mixedom approach.
Mixedom.
Yeah, it's this attempt to sort of blend biblical principles of stewardship with the underlying philosophy of the world system, especially when you're talking investments, riches.
Right, trying to put a kingdom blessing on a worldly foundation.
You can't really do that and expect the best outcome. It doesn't work. So for this deep dive, we're zeroing in specifically on personal finances. Because as the material really stresses, getting your personal finances into solid biblical order, that's the essential first step, non-negotiable. Before you can even think about managing bigger, kingdom-focused business or corporate finances down the line.
Okay, that sets the stage perfectly. Our mission here isn't quick fixes. It's about structural change, it sounds like.
Right.
All right, let's unpack this fundamental shift then. Because, before we even open a spreadsheet, we have to deal with the spiritual bedrock, right? The ultimate source of provision. This is where we get into these two realms, Sparrow faith and that pervasive spiritual opposition.
Right.
The Mammon factor.
Right. The absolute foundation is this concept of trust. What the sources term sparrow faith. It comes from Matthew 6, Luke 12.
Okay.
And it's the core idea that God will provide your basic needs, food, clothes, shelter, just because he loves you. It's not dependent on your works or your sowing or your reaping in that sense.
So provision is a gift, grace, completely the opposite of some kind of transactional thing where you only get what you earn or, deserve.
That's the critical paradigm shift.
Yeah.
And that shift means settling this big question: source versus channel.
Source versus channel. Explain that.
God is always the source.
Yeah.
Always. Your job, your business, your investments, those are just the delegated channels that the provision flows through. One of the authors mentioned working for IBM for 19 years.
Okay.
And having to constantly remind himself, God is my source. IBM is just the channel releasing the salary.
Okay. But I wonder then, if God is the source, why even have the channel? Doesn't relying on a job or a business things that can fail, doesn't that kind of contradict the absolute trust idea a little bit?
That's a really good question. And it gets right to our role as stewards, actually.
Yeah.
The channel exists, I think, for two main reasons. First, It tests our faithfulness, right? Will we manage the little thing, the money, correctly? And second, partnership. God could provide everything miraculously. And sometimes he does think Elijah fed by ravens, Jesus feeding the 5,000.
Right, those examples.
But generally, the kingdom seems to operate on partnership. We work faithfully through the channels he delegates.
I see. So that when the channel does change, you get downsized, the economy tanks, your business struggles, there shouldn't be that gut-wrenching terror, that paralysis. Because the source itself, that hasn't changed. It's infinite, unchangeable.
Exactly.
That fear then is really a sign that maybe the channel had started to replace the source in your heart.
Precisely. If you settled that employer issue, that source issue, fear really has no legitimate place. Now, contrasting with Sparrow faith, we have the opposition, the spirit of Mammon.
Right, Mammon. Let's define that. What exactly is this force? It's more than just not liking money, isn't it?
Oh, much more. Mammon's core aim is spiritual. It wants people to empower money with sacred value, to make money the channel, their functional source of security, happiness, well-being, all of it.
So it leads people to love money.
Yes. And critically, to fear the lack of money. It's a spiritual fight over who provides your identity and your safety.
And the source material points out this affects everyone, rich and poor, just maybe in different ways.
Absolutely. The sources actually list 10 symptoms of Mammon's influence. The first one is pervasive worry and anxiety over money.
Makes sense.
Rich people, they fear losing their status, their assets. Poor people, they fear never having enough, perpetual lack. The material even mentioned that Time magazine article about affluenza.
Oh, yeah, I remember that term.
This deep, chronic anxiety that affects the very wealthy. They're burdened by maintaining status, constantly afraid of losing the fortune that sort of defines them. So you see, Mammon doesn't care if you're rich or poor. It just needs you emotionally chained to money, whatever the amount.
So perpetual bondage is the goal, not necessarily just poverty.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the second symptom we should look out for?
Money mismanagement. Basically, a failure of accountability. It's summed up in that classic phrase, I just don't know where the money went.
Uh-huh. We've all probably said that.
Right. When people refuse to track things, to have a system, they lack financial accountability. And that signals irresponsibility to the ultimate source.
And this connects back to that powerful trust fund analogy you mentioned earlier.
It does. Imagine you're managing a multi-trillion-dollar trust fund for the king. Two families apply for funds. Who do you invest in? The one with a clear budget, a history of use, defined goals. Or the family that just says, we need maybe $7,000, but we don't really know our monthly bills.
Yeah, the choice is obvious.
It's a hard truth. But if we can't even account for how we use the money he entrusts us with, how could we reasonably expect the source to give us more? Irresponsible stewardship isn't just bad math. It hints at a deeper belief that money is somehow owed to us, rather than being a resource we're managing for him.
That really reframes it. Irresponsibility is bad philosophy, not just bad bookkeeping. Okay, the third symptom, impulse buying. That seems incredibly common today.
Oh, definitely. It's that inability to resist buying something just because it was cheap, or for the thrill of getting it, even if you don't need it at all. The sources tell this story. One of the authors was shopping in a Hong Kong mall and suddenly felt this intense physical anxiety, pulse racing, sweating a bit.
Just from shopping.
Yeah. And the feeling was the Mammon spirit basically screaming, you better grab this cheap thing. You might miss out. This deal won't last.
Wow, the fear of missing out FOMO, but weaponized for shopping. So what broke that anxiety? What was the action?
The spiritual counter was simple but powerful. They literally stopped, paused, made a list of people they actually wanted to bless, and refocused their buying power on generosity, on others.
Changing the focus.
By shopping with that specific closed circle list, prioritizing blessing others, the anxiety Mammon's grip just broke. It shifted the money's purpose from self-gratification to serving.
Okay, now this is where, for me, it gets really, really interesting. Connecting Mammon not just to spending habits, but to something deeper, a spiritual rot the material calls iniquity. And this comes straight from that story about Simon in Acts chapter 8.
Yeah, Simon the sorcerer. He saw the apostles operating in power, and he literally tried to buy spiritual power and authority, the ability to impart the Holy Spirit with money.
Right. Bad move.
Peter's response was intense. He condemned him, said his heart was all wrong, and that he was trapped in the gall of bitterness and a bond forged by iniquity.
Okay, that word iniquity. The Greek is adikia. Let's unpack that for listeners, because it seems much deeper than just, doing a bad thing, a sin.
Right. Adikia means unrighteousness, lawlessness, transgression. The material really emphasizes this isn't just a surface action, a sin. It's the deeper, often internal, maybe even inherited pattern of lawlessness that warps the heart itself. Peter directly linked Simon's attempt to buy power to this root of adikia.
So Mammon exploits this existing inner lawlessness, like bitterness or maybe a feeling of worklessness. It uses that as a foothold to lodge the fear and love of money in your soul.
That's the connection. The logic is, if your heart is already operating by a kind of lawlessness, you'll naturally believe money can buy what only God can truly give, like power or worth or security.
It's like a conflict between two fundamental operating systems inside you. Simon wanting to buy spiritual authority just revealed that bitter root of unrighteousness that Mammon could easily grab onto.
Exactly. The goal is always control, always authority. But the good news, the antidote is right there in Scripture too. Isaiah 53.5 says Jesus was wounded for our transgressions, our sins, and bruised for our iniquities.
Wounded versus bruised. Interesting distinction.
Yeah, wounding feels external, right? But bruising suggests a deeper internal impact, designed to deal with those deep-seated, maybe inherited patterns of lawlessness, the adikia. So freedom comes through yielding to righteousness. Romans 6.8 talks about that, and through active repentance and confession, like 1 John 1.9 promises, that cleanses us from all unrighteousness.
So dealing with Mammon isn't just changing spending habits, it's an internal cleanup job, diagnosing and treating those deep spiritual roots of fear and lawlessness that Mammon uses as its entry point.
Absolutely. We have to be free from that bondage to actually move into financial freedom.
Okay, that makes sense. You have to be free internally first.
Because look, if God is truly your source, then money has to be your slave, your tool to get kingdom work done. But if money has become your source, well, God's not going to be your slave just to get you more money. That distinction, it changes everything.
That's powerful. Okay, let's transition then. Section 3. Two economic systems. We really need clarity here on the definitions of wealth, money, and riches. The sources are emphatic that these are not the same, and confusing them leads to big financial mistakes.
Yeah, this clarity is absolutely essential. 3 distinct concepts. First, wealth. This belongs squarely in God's system. Wealth is defined as things with inherent intrinsic value, things created by God. Think land, houses, actual gold and silver bullion, natural resources. When the Bible talks about getting the power to get wealth, it wasn't talking about paper currency.
Okay, and what's the kingdom purpose for this kind of wealth?
It's designed primarily as an inheritance. Proverbs 13.22 says, "A good man leaves an inheritance not just to his kids, but to his children's children." Wealth is meant to last, to increase across generations. Think Abraham, Isaac, Jacob as a tangible sign of God's covenant faithfulness.
Got it. Wealth is generational intrinsic value. Okay, second category, money. This, you said, is man's system.
Right. Money is just.
Yeah.
It's a man-made, morally neutral medium of exchange. A placeholder for deferred goods, really. It has zero intrinsic value in itself. Its worth depends entirely on what people think it's worth, market opinion.
Okay.
And Jesus basically confirmed its allegiance to the world system, didn't he? When he talked about the coin with Caesar's image on it. Render unto Caesar, money belongs to Caesar's realm.
So money is a tool we have to manage faithfully, yes, but it's inherently tied to the world system.
Precisely. And Scripture often calls money a little thing. Luke 16.10.
Right.
Our faithfulness with this little thing is actually a test of our capacity to handle the true riches later on. We have to govern money, not let it govern us.
Okay, that's clear. Wealth, God's system. Money, man's system. What's the third category? Riches. You said it's kind of in between.
Yeah, riches are defined basically as money working for you. Think investments, stocks, bonds, capital gains. Now, this category is called potentially deceitful if you trust it as your source. Mark 4.19 warns about the deceitfulness of riches choking the word. But riches themselves aren't inherently wrong.
Okay, so what's the key then?
The critical instruction from the sources is that riches must be identified, assigned a specific, God-directed purpose, often referred to as funds the master has need of, ready for immediate kingdom deployment when he calls for them.
So if you don't give your riches a specific kingdom job.
Mammon will happily assign them a self-serving job instead, like hoarding or status or just more accumulation.
That makes sense. And this difference, wealth, money, riches, it dictates how these two economic systems operate fundamentally differently, doesn't it?
Completely differently. The world system, it's built on the core belief in scarce resources, and it operates primarily by addition and percentage increase. You know, a banker gets excited about a 20% annual return. That's seen as phenomenal in the world system. But it's always limited by how much you started with and market constraints.
Right, it's linear growth based on what you already have, but the kingdom system, that starts from a place of ultimate abundance, right?
Exactly. It operates on abundance and multiplication. The expectation, which Jesus taught in the parable of the sower, is a 30, 60, or even 100-fold return. Optimal yield. This multiplication model is just. It's vastly superior to the world's addition and percentage game.
30, 60, 100-fold. That's exponential.
We're taught to manage abundance, not scarcity. Think about it. If you plant one seed and get 100 seeds back, you're suddenly not limited by your initial tiny investment anymore. You're operating on a totally different geometric curve of increase.
Yeah, just grasping that perspective shift is freeing in itself. Okay, we've laid the groundwork, the source, the opposition, the two different economic playing fields. Let's move now into the really practical side of stewardship, bread for eating, which covers our daily personal consumption.
Right. Bread for eating is the second of the 5 biblical uses of money that are outlined in 2 Corinthians chapter 9. It's basically the practical management of your day-to-day needs and wants.
And the key tool, the mechanism for getting accountability and stewardship here, is what the sources call the closed circle, essentially a budget.
Absolutely. The closed circle captures everything. Your obligations, like tithe, taxes, debt payments, your necessities, food, shelter, utilities, and your wants, everything else.
Yeah.
And it's established by answering one crucial question, prayerfully, in agreement with God. How much is enough?
How much is enough? That question alone feels like spiritual warfare against Mammon, which is always whispering not enough.
It is. The closed circle forces you into an agreement with the source about what your genuine needs actually are.
I really liked the illustration the sources used to show the power of this kind of structure, the yellow plate and cup analogy. Can we unpack that a bit? It seemed really insightful.
Yeah, it's a great story. It was about a friend who was really struggling to lose weight, tried everything, kept failing. Then he joined a university study. They didn't actually restrict what he ate.
Oh, so not a diet in the usual sense.
No. They enforced how he ate.
Yeah.
They gave him this cheap yellow plastic plate and a matching cup. And the rule was everything he consumed, food or drink, had to be served on that plate or in that cup. And it had to be eaten sitting down at a table with a proper place setting, no distractions like TV or reading.
Okay. So the control mechanism wasn't calories, it was the structure itself, the process.
Exactly. The process, which he admitted was a pain in the neck, automatically eliminated all the unplanned, impulsive, undisciplined eating. No more grazing from the fridge standing up. No midnight snacks in front of the TV. No grabbing handfuls of chips while working.
So cut out all the mindless consumption.
Precisely. And his weight loss just took off immediately. That simple yellow plate acted as a physical boundary against impulse.
That is a perfect analogy for finances, isn't it?
Right.
The closed circle budget functions exactly like that financial yellow plate and cup. It forces structure. It demands planning. It eliminates all those unplanned, impulsive little expenses that just bleed a family's cash flow dry. It forces you to be accountable for every single dollar.
And here's the key. This structure is actually the path to freedom, not restriction. It sounds counterintuitive, maybe. But when you manage your closed circle, money finally becomes the slave you tell it where to go, instead of being the master that causes all the worry and stress.
Okay, but what happens if, when you finally do close your circle, you look at the numbers and realize, uh-oh, I'm already spending 120% of what I bring in? That leads us right into needing to step up to your debt, doesn't it?
Directly. The prophet Haggai talked about earning wages only to put them into a bag with holes. That constant financial leak. That feeling of never having enough. It's often because of that overspending. And the biggest hole in the average North American's financial bag, according to the material, it's the interest paid on debt.
How big a hole are we talking?
The calculation in the sources is pretty shocking. It amounts to something like 50% to 67% of a person's entire lifetime income.
Wait, hang on. Let that sink in. 50 to 67%. The sources are saying the average person effectively works, what, from age 25 to 55, just to pay interest to banks and lenders.
That's the implication.
That paints debt not just as a financial mistake, but as a systemic theft of your actual life hours, your energy, your productivity.
That's exactly the severity of the interpretation presented. It's a systemic robbery of your most productive years. And the sources dig into the spiritual deception behind debt, too. They note that while having debt isn't always sinful in itself, borrowing without the means or intention to repay, that is specifically called wicked debt in Psalm 37.21.
Okay, borrowing without a plan to repay is wicked. And the original Hebrew word is connected to lending and debt. They reveal something about the spiritual danger too, right?
Yes, two key words here, nasha and nashak. Nasha is interesting because it's a homonym. It means both to deceive or beguile, like the serpent in the garden, and to lend it interest. The sources argue those two meanings are spiritually linked, that lending it interest often involves some level of beguilement or deception.
Okay, so nasha is deceive lend at interest. What's nashak?
Nashak means to strike with a sting, specifically like a poisonous snake bites. And the sources point out this is the word used in Habakkuk 2 to refer to your creditors. They're called loan snakes, not loan sharks. The implication is the Mammon spirit uses debt to first deceive people into a lifestyle they can't afford, and then it skings them with crushing interest payments.
Wow, deceived and then bitten. So how do we fight back against this? What's the practical and spiritual strategy for getting free from debt according to this material?
It's a clear four-step strategy. First, if it applies, repentance for any wickedness involved in borrowing without means. That deals with the spiritual defilement side.
Okay, spiritual cleanup first.
Second, you have to change your focus. Stop being overwhelmed by the huge total amount you owe. Instead, focus on what you can do right now. Like Jesus focusing on the 5 loaves the disciples did have, not the thousands they still needed to feed.
Right. Focus on the immediate, manageable actions. What's step 3?
Step 3 is you must close your circle. You need that budget to determine the exact disciplined amount you genuinely have available each month for debt repayment. No guesswork.
Okay, get the facts straight. And step 4, this sounds like the crucial one.
It is. This is the critical spiritual step. You must list every single creditor, and yes, that includes family members you owe money to. Make it formal. Then you contact each one, explain your situation, present your repayment plan based on your closed circle, and secure their formal agreement to that plan, even if the payment amount seems tiny.
Why is getting their agreement the absolute key? Why is that the trigger?
Because that act of integrity, of bringing it into the light and getting their authorization, is what lines up your natural obedience with God's supernatural power. The forces use this great analogy.
Yeah.
Your natural obedience, making that agreed-upon payment faithfully, however small, is like a copper wire. When you stretch that copper wire parallel to God's power, the overhead electric line, power is induced. You've submitted the whole mess to integrity. You've gotten authorization from the lender. You're now operating in total faithfulness within the agreement.
So that authorization, that agreement, seems to be the key that unlocks the door, breaks Mammon's legalistic hold, and allows God to step in supernaturally.
It's precisely the point of authorization. There's this powerful story in the sources about a man in South Africa. He closed his circle, did the math, realized he could only afford 10 Rand a month towards a large corporate debt. It's like pennies.
10 Rand, tiny.
Tiny. But he went to the corporation, formally presented his situation and his 10 Rand a month plan, and incredibly, they agreed to it. He then faithfully paid that 10 Rand every single month for over a year.
Just kept paying the 10 Rand.
Yep. And because he demonstrated that integrity, that faithfulness within the agreement, the corporation was apparently spontaneously moved later on to just release him from the entire remaining debt. Wiped clean.
Wow. So his natural obedience, the faithful 10 Rand, unlocked the supernatural acceleration.
Exactly. And this kind of supernatural release is reported often. Debts that look like 10 or 20 years of payments suddenly getting cleared in maybe 18 months, 2 or 3 years. But, and this is a huge warning in the material.
Okay.
If you haven't done this, if you haven't stepped up to your debt, closed your circle, and secured that creditor agreement, then any discretionary spending you do, even giving or tithing, is technically done with your creditor's money without their authorization, which, by the standards laid out here, makes you operating wickedly like a thief.
Oof. That's a hard word. Integrity has to come before generosity or even sowing in that case.
Integrity absolutely precedes prosperity in this system.
Okay, that is a vital correction for many of us, I think. That leads us perfectly into the 5 biblical uses of money. Starting with the first one, the non-negotiable one, seed for the sower, which is the tithe.
Right. The tithe is presented as the very first act of stewardship once money comes in. Defined as 10%, the Hebrew mazer means 1/10 of your gross income. It's the second foundational principle in God's financial ways, right after recognizing God as the only source.
And the sources really stress that tithing isn't just a rule from the law of Moses, is it? It's older, an ancient path.
That's exactly right. It existed more than 430 years before the law was given to Moses. We see it way back when Abraham tithed to Melchizedek in Genesis 14. So it's presented not as an arbitrary law, but as a universal principle, kind of like gravity.
Like gravity, how so?
Well, you can choose to ignore the law of gravity, but eventually you're going to fall. The sources suggest if you choose to ignore the principle of tithing, you're basically choosing to operate solely within the world's limited system, not accessing the kingdom system of abundance.
Okay, but practically speaking, for someone really struggling, maybe deep in debt, how can they possibly justify giving away 10% right off the top? It feels impossible.
And that's exactly why tithing is described as such a powerful generator of Sparrow faith. If your budget, your closed circle, clearly shows you cannot afford to give away 10% and still meet your needs with the remaining 90%, well then tithing forces you, doesn't it? It compels you to rely completely on God to make that 90% cover 100% of your needs.
So it's an act of spiritual warfare in itself, a declaration that money has no ultimate power over you, that God alone is your source.
Precisely. And the tithe itself, it's characterized as holy unto the Lord. What does that specific designation, holy, mean for how we should handle it physically?
Good question.
It means the tithe is holy, literally dedicated, set apart for God. You are just the fiduciary steward, the manager of that portion. It's not yours. And crucially, you must not commingle it with your common everyday funds. Think of it like an escrow account or a trust fund. It has to be kept separate. Ideally, you'd arrange for it never even to hit your personal account. But if it does, it needs to be segregated instantly.
And violating that principle, treating the tithe like regular money, the sources compare that to Achan's sin back in Joshua. That seems incredibly serious.
It is treated extremely seriously. Remember Achan? He stole cherem items that were specifically dedicated to God, actually accursed for personal use.
Yeah.
And he hid them among his own stuff.
Right, and it brought disaster on all of Israel.
Exactly. The parallel drawn is that not treating the tithe as holy, commingling it with your personal funds, is spiritually similar. It contaminates your other resources, potentially bringing spiritual trouble or blockage. The primary purpose of tithing isn't just obedience. It's seen as a key act that breaks Mammon's power over your finances and opens the windows of heaven, crediting your treasures in heaven account. That's where resources for later multiplication come from.
Okay, so tithe, use #1, is foundational, holy, breaks Mammon's hold, builds faith, and credits our heavenly account. What about use #2, bread for eating? We touched on the closed circle already. What's the ultimate goal of that budgeting exercise again?
Yeah, the goal of tracking every penny, answering how much is enough, getting that agreement with God, eliminating the unplanned spending. It's really singular, achieving true stewardship and the resulting freedom where money finally becomes your servant, not your master. Once you have that closed circle operating faithfully, you've demonstrated faithfulness in the very little thing, money. And according to Luke 16, that qualifies you to start moving towards handling the true riches.
Okay, makes sense. Needs secured, Sparrow faith. Foundation laid, tithe, closed circle, debt being addressed. Now, the remaining uses seem to move into expansion, partnership, multiplication. Let's talk about use #4, increasing fruits of righteousness, or IFR.
Right. This use has a very specific purpose, using money proactively to build relationships, and critically, to free other people from bondage to the mammon spirit. It's the direct opposite of usury or unrighteous gain, where money is often used to entrap or enslave others.
Okay, building relationships, freeing people. How does that look practically? The material talks about an IFR loan model.
Correct. It's a model where you might lend money, interest-free, to someone or a couple who's really drowning in debt. But, and this is crucial, it is not just a bailout.
Not a handout.
No. It's strictly contingent on two things. The people receiving the loan must agree to close their own circle, create a budget, and they must commit to strict accountability, often reporting back regularly. The loan is then specifically used to retire toxic high-interest debt, like credit cards or payday loans. This frees up their own income so they can start managing it faithfully according to their new budget.
So the investment isn't just financial. It's an investment in their character development, their financial discipline, their spiritual freedom from that cycle of irresponsibility and debt.
Exactly. The act of lending, structured this way, actually helps break the mammon spirit over the debtor by forcing them into a system of integrity and accountability. But what's really interesting is how the sources show it affects the lender too. That story of Paul and Roger really illustrates this perfectly.
Yeah, tell us about Paul and Roger.
So Roger was struggling under some foolish business debt. Paul was his wealthy joint partner, but Paul was getting frustrated. And honestly, he was kind of bound by his own chair missile. Mammon's spirit focused mainly on protecting his own assets, fearful of loss.
Okay, so one struggling, one wealthy, but maybe fearful.
Right. And the Lord apparently instructed the author, quite clearly, to pay off Roger's debt entirely. Now, logically, using kingdom funds to bail out the business partner of a wealthy man, it seemed counterintuitive if the goal was just maximizing financial impact.
Yeah, you'd think the money could go somewhere needier, maybe. But it was a spiritual intervention, aimed at a deeper root issue in both men.
Precisely. The sources interpret it as a radical act of obedience designed to break something spiritually. And apparently it did. That act of giving broke the grip of Mammon on Paul, the wealthy one, who was tightly guarding his assets. He suddenly started seeing God as his true source, not his own protective strategies, and began releasing significant specific funds into various kingdom projects.
Wow.
And simultaneously, it freed Roger from the crushing fear of lack and failure, and his business reportedly began to flourish too, so the money given. It was multiplied many times over for the kingdom, not just financially, but because the fruits of righteousness, the character, the discipline, the freedom in both men were dramatically increased.
That's incredible. That really shows the ultimate goal of kingdom expansion. It's transformed people, which then leads to transformed resource flow. Okay, that naturally leads into use #5. Generosity. How is this different from IFR?
Generosity is more about that spontaneous ability to bless others as the Lord prompts you. Seeing a need and meeting it right there, then buying someone lunch, helping with gas money, providing an unexpected gift just because you sense the Lord wants you to.
So it's more fluid, responsive to immediate needs or promptings. Where does the money for this typically come from?
It can come from a couple of places, either from money you've specifically budgeted within the wants category of your closed circle, deliberately setting aside funds for blessing others, or it can come through disciplined reallocation, like choosing to fast from your food budget for a day or two and giving that money away instead.
Okay, so it's an overflow response. And the result?
The result is pretty direct, according to Proverbs 19.17. Giving to the poor is described there as lending directly to the Lord, and it comes with a promise. He will repay it.
Lending to the Lord. Powerful concept. Okay, that brings us finally to use #3. You might think it should come earlier, but the source is listed here. Sowing and reaping. This is about the multiplication of seed for sowing, right? And it's called the 7th and highest foundational principle.
That's right. This money is exclusively for kingdom investment. It's distinct from giving to meet needs like generosity or even IFR loans. This is about multiplying resources for the kingdom. And it comes with a significant prerequisite. The steward must first become what the sources starkly call a financial eunuch.
Okay, that term definitely needs unpacking. A financial eunuch. What on earth does that mean?
Yeah, it's a strong term. Historically, right, a physical eunuch in a king's court was, well, castrated. This was done specifically to eliminate sexual desire, which qualified him to serve safely within the king's harem, managing the king's wives, without any personal temptation to touch what was dedicated solely to the king.
Okay, so how does that apply financially?
A financial eunuch, in this teaching, is someone whose personal desire to use the king's god's financial resources for their own self-gratification, for their own comfort or status, has been dealt a decisive death blow. It's been metaphorically castrated.
Wow. And how does that happen?
It only happens, according to the sources, after the previous 6 principles, recognizing God as source, Sparrow faith, the close circle discipline, dealing with debt honestly, tithing faithfully, practicing IFR and generosity, after all those have successfully worked together to strip away both the fear of lack and the love of money for its own sake.
So once that internal selfish drive to use God's money for yourself is truly gone, then you're considered qualified, trustworthy to handle potentially much larger amounts of the king's resources as a pure fiduciary manager, without the inherent temptation to misuse it or divert it.
That's the concept exactly. Once you reach that state, the process for sowing involves taking overflow money funds that are genuinely above and beyond your established closed circle budget needs and wants, and deliberately sowing it into a specific kingdom ministry or project. And you have to consciously distinguish, am I just giving this to meet a need, or am I sowing this with an expectation of multiplication?
Okay, so clarity of intent is key. If it is sowing, what then?
If it's sowing, you then have a responsibility to diligently watch over that seed. This involves targeted prayer, maybe even spiritual warfare, actively contending for the promised harvest from that specific seed sown. You expect a return.
And what is the expected return in this kingdom system?
The expectation, based on Jesus' parables, is multiplication. 30, 60, or 100-fold. That return isn't primarily for your own consumption, though. It's drawn from your treasures in heaven account, and it's meant to be directed by God for further kingdom purposes. The author, Earl, shared a personal example of testing this. He sowed a specific sum into a ministry, explicitly stating his expectation of a 10-fold return for further kingdom work.
Okay, a specific expectation. What happened?
About 6 weeks later, completely unexpectedly, he received a check in the mail from someone in his study group. That person said they just felt strongly prompted by God to send it. The amount on the check. Exactly 10 times the amount he had sown.
Wow, that's incredibly specific. A direct supernatural validation of the sowing and reaping principle in action.
Yes, and that experience, that reality, moves us completely away from managing scarcity, which is the world's way, and into managing abundance, which leads to that final concept, the third river analogy.
Right, the third river. Explain that. It sounds like it sums up the different levels of financial maturity.
It really does. Imagine the source, God, as an infinite river of resources. The first river Christian, operating out of fear and a scarcity mindset, sees this river and immediately builds a dam. They hoard everything that comes down the pipeline, terrified it might stop flowing.
Okay, hoarding out of fear. The second river Christian.
The second river Christian maybe lets enough water through the dam to meet their own immediate needs, perhaps with a little bit of generosity sprinkled in. But they're still fundamentally operating with a limiting mindset, controlling the flow based on perceived personal need.
Still managing scarcity, essentially. So who is the third river Christian?
The third river Christian. They fully grasped that the source, the river, is infinite. Their primary job isn't to hoard or control it for themselves. Their job is to become expert canal diggers. They continuously dig channels to direct the water, the financial resources out to meet the needs of the kingdom wherever God directs.
So they're focused on outflow, on distribution.
Exactly. And the faster and more effectively they dig those canals, the more they prove themselves capable and trustworthy, qualifying themselves to manage even greater and greater flows of God's resources. The Lord, the sources suggest, is actively looking for people with a proven track record of building canals, not dams.
That's a fantastic picture. Canal diggers, not dam builders. Okay, so we've really covered a lot of ground. We journeyed from that foundational trust, Sparrow faith, and understanding how to conquer the spiritual opposition of Mammon. Then we moved through establishing those essential boundaries to the closed circle budget, stepping up to debt with integrity. And finally, we looked at actively engaging in kingdom expansion and multiplication through the 5 uses of money, culminating in that sowing and reaping principle.
And if we loop all the way back to the beginning, back to those parables of the talents and the minas that Jesus told, remember the servant who just put the money in the bank?
Yeah, he got the lowest return, basically just interest.
Right. Receiving interest from the world system was presented as the absolute minimum acceptable level of stewardship for money in the kingdom. The greater expectation, modeled by the faithful servants, was multiplication, increase, and a demonstrated readiness to handle more responsibility.
So the Lord is looking for those who prove faithful with what he called a very little thing, money.
So that he can then entrust them with the true riches, which are never just about more money.
Right. The ultimate goal isn't just accumulating cash. It's about being found faithful, trustworthy, capable of channeling the infinite resources of the source for his purposes. Whether you're managing $5 or $5 million right now, your job isn't to secure the source. He is secure. Your job is to manage the resources. He's entrusted to you with absolute integrity and growing wisdom.
Absolutely. And really the wisdom, the understanding behind these principles, that internal philosophical shift that's far more valuable in the long run than just learning the formulas or the steps themselves. So go and apply these things. Seek that wisdom. It's worth more than gold.